Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful, beautiful September day and afternoon. It's just gorgeous out there. And welcome to the Tricon Church and the 2019 Filipov Forum for Peace and Justice. My name's Bob Brown. I'm a minister here at Tricon. And for 17 years now, a major part, a highlight of our year is hosting and contributing to this sacred event. And what makes it sacred for us is that this forum is tangible evidence showing how the words of Jesus from 2,000 years ago can actually be taken seriously today and applied directly as a powerful antidote to the poison of evil. In the face of calculated violent attacks, a member of this house of worship chose peace, even as it ripped her heart out. She chose love over revenge and denounced war as the answer. Loretta Filipov showed us how the gospel can actually have a dramatic, real-life impact on the world. Filipov was a beloved member of our church and a perpetual light and moral compass to all who knew him. The tragic violence that unfolded 18 years ago struck this community like an anvil when they learned that Al was aboard a plane bound for LA. None were more terrorized, of course, than his wife, Loretta. And yet, the foundation of Loretta's soul is rooted in the pursuit of nonviolent peace activism. And whatever roots of faith in a just God remained in her, in the subsequent months they were nourished by an indomitable determination. And that determination was that love must always win. Evil will never have the last word. And somehow, some way, her beloved's legacy would be louder and a more enduring voice. From the ashes of devastating grief, purpose and meaning were gently reborn in the advent of the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum. Its mission, promote peace and justice among all people. And this is why we gather here this afternoon. Each one of us has the power to choose love over hate, community building over segregation, relationship restoration over sustained resentment. By your very presence here tonight, you're joining with Loretta and countless others around the world who stand as activists against hatred, seekers of justice, and co-creators of a new humanity. Together here tonight, in this gathering, we proclaim the proclamation of the persistence of peace, the power of creativity, and the relentlessness of collective action. Together we here tonight will listen to one woman who discovered where her talents and strengths and abilities intersected with the great need of the world. And she was compelled to act on it. So this afternoon, we, ordinary people, will recall a day, remember a life, and change the world. Welcome to the 2019 Al Filipov Forum for Peace and Justice. You are on sacred ground. If you like what this is about, you can contribute to the cause. There are donation baskets here, and I believe there's one at the front of the church up there in the sanctuary for all those who would like to support us financially. Also, I want to let you know there are men's rooms and women's rooms downstairs, located just down on the lower level there. And there's one just outside this door, right directly behind me, and we don't really care who uses it. Help yourself. And finally, you are all invited to a reception following in the parish hall after the talk. So thank you for coming out this afternoon and standing with the Filipov family for peace and for justice. And now to introduce this year's speaker is Forum Board Member Claudia Beach. Claudia.
Good afternoon and welcome once again. My name is Claudia Beach and I am, as Bob said, I'm a member of the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum Committee. I have the privilege, and it's truly a privilege, of introducing Ms. Gibbs, but before we invite her up, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her because she's led an amazing life and has just done amazing things. So the story begins in Niagara Falls, New York in 1978. Lois was struggling to raise a family that included 2 children suffering from a variety of rare illnesses. She learned that her neighbors were also struggling with unexplained illnesses. And if you can believe it, a survey at the time found that 56% of the children born in Niagara Falls between 1974 and 1978 had at least one birth defect. Many homeowners' basements were covered with a thick black substance, and vegetation around the houses were dying. So Lois knew that something was very wrong. So she soon discovered that her home and those of her neighbors sat beside 20,000 tons of toxic chemicals. Like the playground was like on top of all of this. This shocking finding spurred Lois to lead her community in a struggle to protect the families from the hazardous waste in their own backyards. She started demanding the federal government to clean up the toxic waste and organized her neighborhood into the Love Canal Homeowners Association. It was an uphill battle, but she persisted. By 1980, a presidential emergency order had declared a health crisis in Love Canal, Love Canal, and relocated more than 800 families, reimbursing them for their homes. In response to the Love Canal disaster and the discovery of other toxic waste sites around the country, Congress passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980, better known probably by most of you as the Superfund Act, to clean up such sites. It would have been easy for Lois to stop there. She had a great victory, but she didn't. So through this experience, she realized that no local, state, or national organization existed to provide communities with advice, guidance, and technical assistance necessary to win such a battle. So to ensure that no other community would have to face a toxic health threat alone, she founded the Center for Health and Environment and Justice in 1981. CHEJ has helped more than 15,000 groups comprising roughly 2.25 million people successfully fighting environmental health threats across the country. In the fight against fracking in New York State, CHEJ conducted trainings, spoke at rallies and conferences, and provided testimony and technical assistance to activists throughout the state. CHEJ was the key grassroots organization institution in the fight for the iconic federal right to know policy, which ensures that workers and communities are informed and educated about possible chemical exposure in their daily lives. Lois has appeared on 60 Minutes and The Oprah Winfrey Show. In 1982, CBS produced a movie about her life, Lois Gibbs, The Love Canal Story. Outside magazines listed her as top 10 who made a difference honor roll. And now, of course, most important, she will receive the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Award. Lois, would you please come forward? Loretta Filipov, the heart and founder of and soul, we couldn't do this without Loretta, will join us as well. What do you need? Here we go.
I'm going to step up.
Yep.
Yes.
Got it? Okay. So here we go. So Lois, it is the purpose of the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum to honor an individual who, through his or her work and life, has made a positive contribution to social justice and peace, and who inspires individuals to make a difference in their own communities. Lois, your children suffered from unexplained illnesses and you were afraid. But when you learned that your neighborhood had been polluted with toxic chemicals, you turned that fear into action. Your courage and determination put Love Canal and environmental issues on the national agenda. And because of your advocacy, Congress passed the Superfund Act to clean up other toxic waste sites. Through your work, you have helped more than 15,000 grassroots organizations confront leaking landfills, polluted drinking water, and hazardous waste in their communities. Your ongoing work to expose the dangers of environmental pollutants stands as a model of what can happen if just one person takes a stand. And if I can coin something, I just feel like you embody this. You have demonstrated your belief that we should not say, not in my backyard, but rather you stand for not in anybody's backyard. You are a national model for active citizenship and are a true pioneer in the field of environmental justice. And you embody our mission. With this medal, we stand behind you and support all that you do. We hope you will treasure it, and it will remind you how one person really can make a difference. Please continue to shape the world. It needs it. And now it is our honor to present you with the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Award. Congratulations.
So, thank you so much. I am so honored and, for the first time in my life, almost speechless, which I can't be because I'm talking. So, this really is an honor, and it really is so true in my work with 2.whatever million people across the country. It is one person who moves forward, who lights a spark. And it is that spark, just like the spark that you lit after Al was gone, of love and peace and not hate. They light the spark that creates this roaring fire, a roaring fire that catches on. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, we need that roaring fire. We really do. And we're doing it with Loretta, we're doing it with my work, but we really need a bigger flame. We need a bigger movement. And so I just am really proud to be in front of you today, and I want to tell you a little bit about Love Canal. I know some of the gray hairs know it. I'm also gray hair, but I use stops. But some of the youngins don't know the story entirely. But the story was 40 years ago. It was 1978, right? When was Flint? When was Newark, New Jersey, where the families are drinking poisoned water? When is Birmingham, Alabama, where children are told before they enter their home, they must take off all of their outer clothing and only enter in their undergarments and bare feet? Because the environment is so toxic that walking from a school bus to their home poisons their clothes to the point that it would build up in the house and poison the children. So 40 years ago, so I travel around the country and I talk with folks all the time. Most of what I do is not in a forum like this, but rather sitting in a living room with a mother in tears and a father who feels helpless, absolutely helpless, who are saying, Miss Gibbs, or in the South, Ms. Lois, we need your help. 40 years ago, I bought the American dream. I feel very proud, and I still am very proud of being an American. I am very proud of our democracy. I am very proud of the fact that we can speak up, speak out, that we can do things that other countries cannot. And I'm also very ashamed. So in 1978, I had the American dream. I had a husband who was gainfully employed. I had two wonderful children. I had everything that my mom and dad had fought hard to make sure I had. My generation was better than my parents' generation, financially and stability. That is not true of the younger generation. That is not true of the younger generation. And so I got the American dream, and I moved into my house, and I was all happy and excited, and I'm going to raise my children, and they're going to be good Christians, and, you know, they're not going to cuss, and whatever. To be the soccer champion, whatever. And then I discovered Love Canal. And it was the biggest teacher of how our democracy works and why we all need to be a participant, regardless of where you're coming from, conservative, progressive, or unsure. Is there an unsure category? I think there's an unsure category. I don't know. The other people. At Love Canal, when I found out my son's school was on top of the dump, 20,000 tons of chemicals, and in the middle of the playground there would often be a hole. The hole was the size of the top of a 55-gallon drum, because the drums beneath the playground would collapse, rust out, and the covers would fall in, and the earth would fall in where the covers to the drums once were. And there would be black ooze coming up, and the children played in it, and no one told us. No one told us that that was a dangerous thing. We knew it wasn't good, obviously, but we didn't know the toxic chemicals in there were as dangerous, and the school just came out and covered it up. So I went to the elementary school, and I said, and I was not always this person who cared about others. At this time, I wanted my child to be moved from the 99th Street School to a safe school somewhere. And I went to meet Dr. Long. I will remember him to the day I die, who sat at this big oak table and said to me, well, whether Love Canal is contaminated or not, we are not about to move 407 children because of one irate, hysterical housewife. How dare he? How dare he? And then so I realized that going alone, being the spark, is really important, but you have to create the flames. You have to create the fire. It takes a village. And so I went out and started knocking on doors and told everybody what Dr. Long said to me. And they said, really? I said, yeah. But he didn't deny it. No, sir, he didn't deny it. After talking to people, I went and did some investigation. I'm a high school graduate, and I hated school. I could never figure out why algebra was going to help me bake a better cake. I had a goal. I was going to be a mom, right? You don't need algebra if you're a mom. And so I went and started doing some research, and I ran into this report. Now, why this report is important is because this is what's happening and happened in Flint, in Newark, New Jersey, in Birmingham, Alabama, name the polluted site, in Hanover, Massachusetts, where children and adults are dying of brain cancer as we sit here. 2 more brain cancers were diagnosed last week from an old fireworks factory that has gone bankrupt, and the area is contaminated. So the story is the same. So when I looked at this report, in the back of it, it talked about in 1976, 2 years before I got involved, 1976, they had looked at Love Canal, just like they looked at the Flint water situation. The government had looked at it and said that to clean up Love Canal would consist of a couple of things. One, they could put a cap over it and a trench around it, which would contain it. They could do nothing, or they had some other ideas for digging it up and taking it out. And then after they had the options of what they could do, they understood it was contaminated. They understood people were being exposed. They understood people were being poisoned. They understood that. That's why they're looking at this report. At the end of this report was what they call a cost-benefit analysis. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how decisions are being made today, whether it's about climate, whether it's about toxic waste, whether it's about drinking water. They did a cost-benefit analysis. Here's how it works in a very simple form. It was going to cost $20 million to clean up Love Canal. So that's the cost. Who would benefit? Who benefits from spending $20 million of taxpayer money? And then they looked at each of their families. My husband was a chemical operator. The vast majority of my community were employed in the chemical industry. My husband made $10,000 a year. My husband was worth $10,000 a year. They assumed my son would follow in his daddy's footsteps and be a chemical worker. And so he was worth $10,000 a year plus an inflation factor. Because I did not work outside of the home, I was worth zero. And the assumption is that my daughter would also not work outside of the home, and so she too was worth zero. They looked at how much money each household brought in to determine whether or not we were worthy of $20 million cleanup, of being relieved from the exposure to some of the most toxic chemicals known to man. At Love Canal, 56% of our children, over half of our children, were born with birth defects. This is what they're waging against, their $20 million. 56% of our children had 3 ears, double rows of teeth, extra fingers, extra toes, or were mentally retarded. Of the 22 women who became pregnant at Love Canal during the study period, only 4 normal babies were born. The rest of those pregnancies ended in miscarriages or stillborn babies. Were they worth $20 million? The government said in 1976, and again, this is before I got involved, the answer is no. They put that study in a file cabinet and shut the door. And there it sat until there was a story in the local newspaper and we began to create that roaring fire. All across the country today, those same analyses are being made. God did not make us worthy or not worthy of what we could raise in a salary on a daily basis. Nobody puts a price on my children's head and thinks they can walk away. Nobody. So I've been working in Flint. So in Flint, they knew that people were being poisoned. They knew because people themselves, families who live there, went and got their tap water tested out of their own pocket and presented it to the city and to the state and to the Environmental Protection Agency. And they were told that they were wrong, that they polluted the sample themselves for attention. Why? Flint is a primarily African American poor community. And although I don't have the study, I would be willing to bet it was about they were not worth the cost of remaining on the Detroit water system. What caused their problem was they moved from the Detroit water system to the river, the Flint River. As I walk with the men and the women at Flint, they tell stories about their skin burning. Their infant children cannot drink formula made with tap water because of the chlorine in the tap water. Nor do they feel comfortable they can feed their new infant children breast milk because they are lead poisoned and they don't want to transfer it to their child. Children in Flint who are lead poisoned now not only have a higher chance of cancer, but they also have a learning disability. And because it's a poor black community, they don't have a whole lot of special education teachers that are able to help these children with learning disabilities to be successful in school. And what does that mean? That means these children are going to drop out of school. We see it all the time. And then these children are going to hang out on the streets. And then those children are going to get into trouble. And then those little black children are going to go to jail. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Most of our prisons are built on toxic waste sites. So while they're in jail, they don't get rehabilitation. I said that wrong. Rehabilitation. Thank you. They don't get that thing. And then they come out of jail, and now they have a mark against them, right? And they still have a learning disability. And they still can't get a job. None of this was necessary, is my point. In America, in a democracy, we the people, have the ability to say no to the poisoning of innocent families. I will tell you what it's like when I go to the doctor for my yearly checkup and I come home and I sit on my couch and I can't think. Because I was exposed and someday the bomb is going to drop. I got cancer. I got some horrible disease. I'm not going to watch my grandchildren grow up. When my daughter got pregnant, I cried for days. Because a study at Love Canal also showed, a study that was done 20 years later, also showed that the children of Love Canal families, my children, Michael and Melissa, the children of Love Canal families were also having birth defects at over 50%. When my daughter said, "Mom, I'm going to give you a grandchild," I cried. I said, "Honey, let's go get an amniocentesis, make sure everything's okay." And she said, "Nope, this is my baby. And no matter what happens, I'm going to love him or her. This baby will be born." The idea that lives have been changed, people have been poisoned, and it's generational. It's generational all across this country. And our government allows it. The government, the city, the state, and the federal government knew about Love Canal before I knocked on that first door, before I went to see Dr. Long, before I understood what was happening to my daughter. My daughter was my only child that was conceived and carried at Love Canal and gave birth. And Melissa was 3 years old. And on Friday, she had these bruises on her body. And Saturday, the bruises got larger. And Sunday, her entire body was covered with black and blue marks. And so I took her to the pediatrician on Monday and said, "There's something horribly wrong with her. She's not acting sick. She's not running a fever. She acts fine, but she's got all these bruises." And the doctor said, "Let's take some blood work. You go home," because back then you couldn't tell right away, "and we'll call you later this afternoon with the results." And so they took her blood and sent me home. And later that afternoon, they called up and said, "Mrs. Gibbs, we think your daughter has leukemia. And her blood count is so low. Here's what we need for you to do. We need you to pick her up and put her in your car. Do not put a seat harness on her. Do not bump her. Do not squeeze her body in any way because she could hemorrhage to death before you get to Buffalo Children's Hospital. And when I got to the hospital, I was standing outside the room and the doctor was explaining for this test, they had to put this needle into her hip and withdraw some bone marrow. But because her blood count was so low, they didn't want to give her heavy anesthetic. So they asked me to go in there and hold her down while they did this procedure and help calm her down. And I walked into this room and my daughter was screaming. She's 3 years old. You can't explain anything to a 3-year-old. They're just too little. She's screaming and her nose is bleeding, her gums are bleeding, and the blood vessels on her face were bursting because of the intensity of her screams. And I started to hold her down and try to calm her down, and I became violently ill and just had to walk out of the room. And I stood outside listening to my daughter say, "Mama, please, they're hurting me. I promise I'll never be bad again." And I tell you this story, my children survived. I tell you this story because this is how children in these communities think they've been harmed. They think they deserve it. They think they've done something wrong that they're being poisoned, right? And the parents are helpless. So they bring the child home, and where do they put the child? They're poor people. My husband, I told you, made $10,000 a year. We paid $90 a week in hematology clinic costs to handle Melissa's blood problem. And that's not even including Michael and his epilepsy and all of those costs. So you have poor people who are trapped in homes that they can't sell. So once you're a Superfund site or once there's a toxic site, the bank refuses to give you even a home improvement loan. So in these communities, the homes begin to deteriorate because they can't fix the roof. And when they can't fix the roof, the water comes in. And when the water comes in, the mold comes in. And it's just a downward spiral for the whole community. And how dare they? And how dare they? So this is why I say to you that we need everybody's voice and everybody's action. That communities like this alone cannot change what needs to be changed. This is about environmental justice. This is about human rights. This is about criminal justice. This is about so many of the societal things that are wrong today. And we can't fix it by voting for a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. We can't fix it by getting the best president in the world sitting, whoever that might be, up in the White House. The only way social change has happened in this country, the only way, and I'm really pleased with the young people today, is that social change happened in this country when it was built from the bottom up. When people got involved locally, when young people got involved in campus. That's where the peace movement came from, was campuses all across America. The civil rights movement came from the young men sitting at the lunch bar and refusing to move. The peaceful marches across the country. Social change doesn't change because you elect the right person. Social change happens when we can change the political climate narrative, that we as American people will no longer tolerate the sacrificing of innocent people because of their race, their faith, their income, their gender preference, whatever. That we are sliding backwards as a society. And we need to figure out how to move this narrative forward. It's actually cheaper to take care of the people. At Love Canal, it costs Occidental Petroleum, the responsible party, $996 million. It would have been cheaper had they moved us all out at the get-go and built a new school. It would have been cheaper. And our families would have been healthier. It would have been cheaper in Flint, Michigan to move the water out of the Flint River back into the Detroit water system. How many tax dollars are going to be paid for health care for these poor children? How many dollars are going to be paid for special education? How many dollars are going to be paid out from our tax dollars as a result of these young people not being employable? Right? They're going to be homeless. It is cheaper to do the right thing. If we had to talk about dollars and cents, it is cheaper to do the right thing. And I think that's the argument we need to bring forward. It is cheaper to deal with climate change than it is to deal with all of these horrible storms, sea rise, and other things. Most people don't know, off Norfolk, Virginia is our Navy base. It is our country's largest and only large Navy base. And they told them there was not going to be any sea rise. No, 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 no. Well, unfortunately, because of the reality of sea rise, and the commander of that base will tell you, when it is raining and when it's a high tide, they need to move their ships out of port. Because if they don't, they will bang into the docks and will ruin our gazillion-dollar warships, which we don't need either, but we won't go there. It is cheaper, and it is easier, and it is safer, and it's more responsible for us as a society to say, we're going to stop this. And we're going to get involved locally and statewide, and we are going to begin to create the society that everyone needs and deserves. And that is a society that can live, play, and work in a safe community from toxics, from violence, from climate change related storms and flooding and stuff like that. That's what we have to do. We've been able to do it. We've been able to do it in the past. The civil rights movement, the peace movement, the women's movement, which was my time. I mean, for 10 years, I was the only woman who was head of a national environmental group. They're all white men. And now that's changing. So we need to continue to change. We need you guys to get involved locally and try to figure out through your faith organizations, through your PTAs, through your various civic organizations, how do we change the conversation from money to social good? Because money is wrong. Money is so wrong. And it costs us more. How do we do that? How do we have that conversation about what we're going to do in the future and where we're going to do it? And that all people, in fact, are born equal. That men and women are equal. That black and whites are equal. Like gays and trans and straights are equal. We are equal. And we need to stop dividing ourselves and figure out a way to move forward, change the narrative, and when we do, our children and our grandchildren will have a better world. It's not legislation, it's not even a political person in the White House. It's all about you and me figuring out how we can take those steps and do that. So thank you. Thank you so much for the award. Totally appreciate it.
Presentation, which you can tell from your standing ovation, fell on very willing ears. You spoke so much of the sparks, and I'd just ask you if you could, yes. Oh, louder, sorry, is that better? Thanks, Susan. my daughter's kindergarten teacher. Anyway, you spoke about Sparks, and we are really thrilled that we have 2 Sparks here to join our program this afternoon. And we have 2 representatives from This Is 0 Hour, and their names are Zanaji Artis, who is a founder and deputy advocacy director, and Ariel Martinez Cohen, who is partnerships director. And 0 Hour is a youth-led movement for climate justice. They believe, as does Lois, that every individual from every community should have access to clean air, water, and public lands. They believe that leadership now needs to come from youth. It's essential since they have inherited the crisis that we've all had a hand in creating. And they believe in the power of youth-led organizing and leadership of youth from different backgrounds and experiences in forging ahead. So I would ask Zanaji and Ariel to come up, and they'll each speak a little bit, and then we have from our congregation, Fran Cummings, you come up too. Fran is a climate activist here and a member of our congregation, and after the youth speak, then Fran will help lead a dialogue with Lois and the youth to talk about where we are and how we need to move forward. Who's going to go first? Okay, Zanaji.
So hi everybody, my name is Zanaji. I am from Connecticut. I'm a sophomore at Brown University right now, and one of the founders of 0 Hour. Should all do intros first?
Yeah, intros sound good. Yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Ariel Martinez Cohen. I just turned 18 years old. I was about to say I'm 17. I'm 18 now. And I use she/her pronouns. I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm the partnerships director of 0 Hour.
And I'm Frank Cummings from this congregation here from Acton, and I'll be moderating later on, but go ahead.
So I guess I'll just start off by talking a little bit about 0 Hour. So we started in the summer of 2017 with just me and 3 other young people who I met at a summer program. Very coincidental, we met at Princeton. We were only there for 3 weeks, but that 3 weeks has really changed my life. So we started 0 Hour, and we hosted a march in Washington, D.C. in 2018, in July. And basically we worked that whole year to connect people around the country around climate justice. And so we've got to meet so many different people. We've met people from Sierra Club, we've met people from lots of other climate justice groups that are organizing. But what's been most important for me is that we've got to connect so many other youth activists. And so that was really the intention of creating 0 Hour. We knew that there have been movements in the past to address government and issues with the government not taking control of the situation and addressing the environmental crisis. But we understand that we can't wait, and I think this is something that you talked about very well as well. That the government has historically not done its part to protect us, and so we wanted to take it upon ourselves as the generation that is going to inherit this crisis to do something about it. So that's a bit about 0 Hour. And then Ariel can talk about a little bit what we've done this past summer and also what we're going to be planning to do soon.
Yeah. So I first got involved with 0 Hour about a year and a half ago when I started learning more about, I started learning more about climate change when I was really young, but a year and a half ago I started learning about how the increasing amount of wildfires in Los Angeles and other places on the West Coast have become more frequent due to greater droughts because of climate change. And I was learning about food deserts. I was learning about how the pollution in LA is at incredibly high rates, and that leads to more climate change. So I wanted to get involved, and so I heard about 0 Hour, and I decided to organize the Youth Climate March in Los Angeles. And we had thousands of people there. We partnered with an immigration organization to organize it there, and it was awesome. And so the Youth Climate March that I organized in Los Angeles also happened at an international level. We had youth climate marches all across the world in 25 different cities. And specifically in Washington, D.C., it was a 3-day event starting off with an art build. Then the next day we lobbied in Congress to try and get our elected officials to sign a pledge to stop taking money from fossil fuel companies. And then the last day was the Youth Climate March. And it ended up raining, kind of rained on our parade, but we still persevered, and we marched, and we got thousands of young people and adult allies all together to demand climate action from our leaders. And so that was kind of what kicked off Zero Hour as an organization. From there, we've had our team of young people speak at different events to our leaders, telling them what we want to see to address climate change. And then this past summer, we went on to organize a youth climate summit in Miami, Florida. And we chose Miami because, of course, there is an increasing amount of natural disasters, and the way Miami will be affected because of rising sea levels, it's going to be underwater pretty soon. So with the Youth Climate Summit, we were able to mobilize 350 young people, bring them to the summit, train them so that they have the skills that they need to be effective community organizers. And it was really successful. We had a lot of speakers there, and it was a great event. And now we are moving on to greater campaigns, different campaigns, and Samaji can talk more about what we're doing in the near future.
Yeah, so this past year we recently released our newest campaign, Getting to the Roots of Climate Change, which is a national climate justice education campaign that talks about different root causes of climate change. So we name patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, and racism as major components that have contributed to climate change. And so the presentation basically goes through those different topics and how they relate to climate change. And so what we've done is we've created the presentation, and anyone who wants to present it in their own community can sign up and become a Zero Hour ambassador. And what they'll do is we'll train them, they'll get on a webinar with us and go through the presentation, then they'll be able to give that information to people in their own communities. Then our next campaign that we'll be rolling out soon is called the Midwest Initiative. We are going to try to basically recruit lots of people in the Midwest to become members of Zero Hour. Right now we're very concentrated along the coasts, but we really want to get into those communities that are being directly impacted by the fossil fuel industry. And so something that we really want to do at Zero Hour is uplift frontline communities. And so these are people who are impacted by similar things about like the story you just heard. And so these are people who are being directly impacted by pollution, who are being impacted by wildfires and intensifying natural disasters. And these are the voices that we really need to uplift in this movement, because historically they have not been given the mic to reach the audiences that people like Al Gore, for example, have gotten the privilege to do so. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're doing next.
Can I mention one more?
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention, very soon on September 20th, Zero Hour is one of the organizations organizing strikes in the US, but the strikes will also occur around the world. And basically the strikes, striking means to skip school, skip work, whatever, just stop doing what you're doing because climate change is so important, and come out to your local strike to demand climate action. And you can find a local strike near you on strikewithus.org.
Friday the 20th.
Yes, in less than a week, yeah.
And there's a train leaving Concord at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. That's the regular commuter train. It leaves at 2 minutes past 9. So the CCHS, that's our high school, has elected not to have an event at CCHS, but instead to go into the Boston event, which is at Boston City Hall at 10 o'clock on Friday morning. So please be there. The train may be crowded. Hopefully the train will be really crowded. People were saying this morning at our church service here that they're going. I know there'll be a lot of folks, so that's the sort of obvious thing to do for those of you in the Concord area. There's also an event at the Lexington High School. So thank you for mentioning that immediate opportunity. I'd like to just see whether either of you have questions for Lois, or whether Lois, you have any questions. This is kind of an opportunity where you made it up as you went along, right? You didn't have a lot of mentors, and now you're in the business of mentoring people, and you guys are making it up as you go along and creating something that's new. And there are a lot of similarities. So do either of you want to engage?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about like the story that you were telling about how you went to the school and you were essentially denied, and they didn't want to talk to you. You were one person alone, but then you gathered all these other people to come with you. And I guess one thing that I think is super important for the climate movement right now, especially with it being increasingly youth-led, is that we need a lot of support from older generations. And so I'm wondering if you can apply like the tactics that you used for recruiting people to join you, and how we might do that as youth with intergenerational support.
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is to listen to see what they care about. I mean, so this is kind of a weird story, but it's not hard when people's children are dying to get them to come out. It's a little more difficult in what you're doing, because not everybody is a believer, and not everybody's making it a priority. So what I've learned over the years is the way to get people to join you is to listen and then spin it. And I don't want to sound like a politician, but there is some truth to it. So I was at a bar. That's what we usually do after our community meetings. We go to a bar. And so I was at a bar, and the community was saying, we can't get anybody involved, we can't get anybody involved. And I'm like, well, that's because you keep talking at them. You just keep telling them all they're going to die, their property value is going to be. I'm like, I wouldn't get involved with you, quite honestly. And then, so we put this bet out. And I said, I bet you I could get that dude who looked like turned out to be a truck driver, but a hardworking man who just wanted to have his beer and watch his game on the TV. I bet you I can get him to join your group, and I want you to listen and see how I do that. And so I went up to there and sat next to this guy and said, you look like a hardworking guy. And he said, yeah, I drive truck. I said, well, that's interesting. Well, did you hear about the incinerator down the street and all this problem and da-da-da? And he says, lady, I want my beer, I want my TV, and I don't need you. And so his game came back on, and I sat there and waited. And while I was waiting, I was thinking, okay, this is an independent truck driver, so what does he likely care about? And so when the next commercial came on, I said, well, I know you don't want to talk to me, but just listen one more time. So there's going to be 250 trucks per day coming down that road. Don't you think that's going to create a problem for you? What do you mean? Well, what about this road? He says, I hate that road. I'm like, okay, why do you hate the road? Well, I hate it because it has a red light there, and then I can't turn left, or some weird thing with the light, and potholes. He says, and he went on and on about these potholes like they were, I don't know. And then his game came back on, and I shut up. He came for his beer and his game. He didn't come to chat with me. And then the next commercial, I said, well, can you imagine how long you're going to wait at that stop sign when there's 250 trucks in front of you? And how many potholes are going to be in that road when you have 250 trucks going down that road, especially in the winter weather and then spring and fall? He said, well, you didn't say that. You talked about some stupid incinerator. He's like, what do you need from me? I said, I need $25 to join this group. And it's an interesting story, because what it is first of all, you have to be patient. You're asking people to join you, and you have to be respectful of them. And you need to figure out not the stuff that we keep talking about, right? But What is it that's going to move him or her? And so that's my advice. Listen really carefully, spin it, see if it works, spin it again, and see if it works.
I think what you really need is Lois. But that sounded like good advice.
They're the Loises of tomorrow. They're fabulous.
So who has some questions for any of these three? Put your hands up. Think about your questions. I see one in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Wait a second.
We have another mic.
Yeah, great.
Do we have a volunteer to move the mic around? So.
Thank you so much to all three of the panelists for your comments. Very timely topic, obviously. My question relates to the fact that at least some of these situations, toxic situations, have been a result of corporate actions or decisions. What would you say you've learned over time regarding the issue of corporate ethics and corporate responsibility in these sorts of situations? Thank you.
So one thing I want to be really clear about corporations, they're not evil and they're not good. They're profit and loss. Corporations are about making a profit, and if they don't, the CEO is fired. And so they're not good or bad. So what we've learned about corporations is if we could impact their profits, if we can impact that piece, then they become huge, conscientious, good corporate citizens. And if you can't, then they're going to make money regardless of what the consequences are. And it's not because they're good or bad, it's because they're accountable to Wall Street. They're accountable to shareholders. So you know, when we did our McToxic campaign, that was getting styrofoam out of McDonald's many years ago. That was actually led by youth, not your level youth, those little youths. And because we used young people like 7, 8, 9-year-olds going to McDonald's with cameras, demanding their sandwiches be wrapped in paper, McDonald's had such a bad rap that they changed from styrofoam to a paper wrap because it was impacting their profit or their image. And so I just, you know, I often hear people say corporations are evil. They're not. They're about profit and loss. And sometimes making a profit, they're doing bad things. But it's our responsibility to expose that and to find a way to get them to do the right thing by making more money doing the right thing.
And I just wanted to add, in response to the Fridays for Future movement, where kids or children and adult allies strike every single Friday, OPEC actually released a report saying that Greta Thunberg, who was the founder of the Fridays for Future movement, and the strikers across the world are their number one threat, the number one threat to their profits. So we can see that people power does make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good point. More questions?
I'm Bob Andrews. I'm affiliated with a local climate action organization and have been since about 2008. We're called Concord Can. And for a long time, we've been working in this community with very little signs of youth involvement. It's been mostly gray hairs. And we thought a lot about, you know, how can we get young people involved? Last spring we had several organizations that form a coalition putting on a speaker series event with a forum with one of our legislators and a panel of youth activists. And it was the first time we had been able to get some youth activists. And a couple of them were from Concord Academy, private school, and they belonged to the Sunrise Movement. And Concord Carlisle High School, at that point, nobody came. And it wasn't because there wasn't an effort at Concord Carlisle High School to get, some students involved. There was an effort. It was fairly arduous, but it didn't come up with anybody. But recently, over the summer, three students at Concord Carlisle did come together as co-leaders for a new Sunrise Hub. And that hub is beginning to take off, and it's reaching out for more members, and it's trying to get older people to work with them. And of course, their priority right now is the climate strike, and getting both other young people and older ones to go to Boston on the 20th. I guess my question is, I never heard of 0 Hour. We've been hearing a lot about the Sunrise Movement. It sounds very similar. Are you working together? And if so, how are you working together? Because you sound like you're on the same team, but you got a different name. All that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So being the partnerships director, I'm kind of the person who has contact with different organizations like Sunrise for 0 Hour. And we do actually work a lot together. We partnered during the Youth Climate March last summer on getting our elected officials to sign the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. And we continue to work with them as partners for, we worked with them for our Youth Climate Summit in Miami, and we're working with them on the strikes now. So yeah, we do a lot of work together. I would say some of the main differences is that we most focus on a younger demographic, like high school age, and they, while they do have some high school age members, a lot of the members nationally at least are college-based. So yeah, that's kind of how we work together with them a lot. Addressing your question about the rise of youth activism and stuff like that, and how it's just now starting to bubble up. There definitely is a lot of hardship, and I've experienced that organizing strikes in Los Angeles in my high school. It was hard to even get my friends to come out and stuff like that. But I think once we normalize activism and get people excited to do it, more people will join, and they just have to find the right organization, whether that be 0 Hour if they feel more comfortable, or Sunrise.
And then I also wanted to talk about Sunrise. So I'm actually in the Sunrise Rhode Island Hub, which started at Brown last year. We transitioned from a different environmental group called Risk, but we became like a Sunrise chapter after that. And I think the defining difference between what we do at 0 Hour and what Sunrise does is that Sunrise is really focusing a lot on government action. I'm sure you've heard a lot about the Green New Deal and issues related to policy. That's a lot of what Sunrise is focusing on. A week ago, they actually just held a summit in Providence, and on Monday after that, they held a sit-in at the State House, which is really great. Sunrise is putting a lot of pressure on government officials to do their part. Whereas 0 Hour, we're getting into communities a lot. So we're doing grassroots work. We're really addressing community-specific issues and trying to get youth in their own communities to do work around that. So, yeah. Thank you for your question.
So I have a question for you guys. If I took this pad of paper and circulated it, would you like people to write down their email addresses in the event?
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be great. If people want to write down their emails, you can join our newsletter, which would be great.
You can get us your email addresses somehow.
Yes.
Yeah, we can also share that as
Send it
well.
around. So you're going to get back to all these people, right?
Yes, we're going to send it.
Look for an email.
I see a hand up, way up over there.
Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Kim Castles, and I'm retired from having been a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences. And I wondered if you could talk about what the relationship is and the interactions between what happens in the classrooms in high schools and colleges and environmental activism, youth-led environmental activism.
So I think that in my experience, so in high school I really didn't learn about climate change or the environment. I think that it's something that's really lacking in high schools, curriculum related to the environment. The only thing that I learned about was ecology, and that was during my last semester of senior year. And then right now, even as a sophomore at Brown, I really had to go out of my way to learn about the environment, so I'll be concentrating in political science and environmental studies. And I'm learning about the environment because that's what I chose to do. But for a lot of people, this isn't information that they're getting taught, because it's not something that they have to. They don't see it as something that is necessary for them to know, and school systems aren't making it mandatory for students to learn that information. So I'd say becoming an activist, I really took that upon myself, because I live on the shoreline in Connecticut. Water has always been something that's very home to me, and so that's sort of what I got involved with in conservation and reducing plastic use. And then I later started Zero Hour to focus more on issues relating to people and how climate change is really going to affect us as people, not just the environment itself. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think that what people learn in school affects how, or like if they're able to become an activist, or how, you know, they're being able to learn about certain issues. And so, from my experience, I took an environmental science class my senior year, and we did learn about climate change and fossil fuels and all that stuff. But the teacher wasn't passionate about the issue. She just sat there and pointed to a PowerPoint and read off the PowerPoint. And I just like looked around my room and I could see that, you know, my peers were just not engaged, they weren't interested. And my heart dropped just because I could tell they're most likely not going to be inspired to become activists. And so I think, you know, if we have more experiential learning, if teachers are more engaged with their students and talking about climate change and more passionate, we'll see an increase in action for young people.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that is that one thing that is happening from the fossil fuel industry is that they are going to elementary schools, especially around Ohio, some of the Midwest areas, so I'm glad you all are going there. And they're doing like coloring books and other things about the Fracassaurus and how it's really good and how fossil, so there is a conscious, well-funded campaign, and it's elementary school. I haven't seen it in high school. It doesn't mean it didn't exist, but I haven't seen it. But in elementary school, to give elementary school teachers and after school teachers where the kids go, these coloring books and these various activities and games that they can play, which really encourages fossil fuels, and it changes the whole narrative, and it's really scary. I mean, the Fracassaurus book just like made my hair stand on end. It's just awful.
More questions? I see a couple over here. Richard is coming with the mic.
So hi, my name is Ellen Weidenbush, and I'm thrilled to be part of the Vietnam War movement in my youth. I'd love to hear from you all. What would you like from us adults? And I don't mean just the gray hairs, but people 30, 40, 50. What are the 3 things, let's say, that we could do to make your voice, to leverage your voice, and to provide the support that you need so you can be out there and be the voice and we can be your support staff?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things that are super helpful for Zero Hour organizers. So when we first started out, we actually targeted adults first because we knew that we needed people who had experience in the movement already to help us sort of build our organization. So one of our first adult mentors was a lobbyist for the Sierra Club. And so she'd done a lot of work related to fossil fuels in her life already as a career. So expertise is one. If you're involved with climate justice organizing already, if you have been in an organization, whether it's anti-war or like anti-pollution, anything related to the environmental movement is helpful. Also, like, resources are super important. So whether it's you, like, giving a ride to someone to bring them to a strike, or donating art supplies for poster making and banner making for that strike, or like donating money. Anything like related to resources is also helpful. And those are the two things that come to mind immediately.
Tell us about your webpage where people can make donations.
Yeah, so you can visit us at thisiszerohour.org/donate. There's also, if you just go to the general website, there's a donate tab on there as well.
Anybody from over here this time? Here's one.
She's been waiting.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments and for the work that you're doing. Lois, I love the way you're campaigning. Grassroots, yeah, that's for sure important. And I like what you said, normalizing activism. Having been an activist for the majority of my life, I'd like to see it normalized, and I can hope that it will happen with the young people today, because the young people, you are the ones who are going to make a difference, because you have the power that you just turned 18. You have the power of the vote, and we have to vote out. I'm a grassroots activism, and vote out the people who are not supporting what you want to see happen.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to people voting right. I'm just saying that alone is not going to change the outcome.
It did in Flint.
It did not in Flint.
I just finished reading the doctor's book, and she said that if she hadn't fought and went up against the elected officials, it wouldn't have happened. She did all that background work with all of the, she did, the studies.
Yes, she did all the studies, and you're absolutely correct. She really exposed Flint and what was happening, but it wasn't the vote. It wasn't that they voted him out, the governor out, that changed Flint. It was because of her work that really changed and brought Flint to the surface. And Flint, by the way, for folks who don't know, they're still being poisoned. That there is this assurance that they're drinking safe water. That is not true. And they have an additional problem because they put the filters on the taps of people's sinks, and now the filters are building up with bacteria. And you'll remember during the Flint crisis, Legionnaire's disease, I think there was 12 or 14 people who died from that. This bacteria is now making people very, very sick, and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. And lastly, most of the people in Flint still have the same hot water heater they had when they were on the Flint River. Nobody's replaced the hot water heater, so you can put clean water through it. But when it comes out, it picks up the lead and the contamination and ends up in, their drinking water or their, yeah. So you are definitely right about her. She is one of my heroes. Oh my gosh, she's just extraordinary human being. Yeah.
Yeah, I also just wanted to quickly add, it just made me think of another thing that adults can do, which would be super helpful. So in my town, there's sustainability committee meetings and zoning committee meetings and all that stuff that happens at the town hall. I, as a full-time student, and Ariel, us youth, are not generally able to go to meetings like that and represent our voices in fighting against issues related to the environment. So going to meetings like that and engaging in your community politics is super helpful as well.
That's a great suggestion. More questions?
Thank you. I apologize, I was maybe half an hour late. It is interesting to hear the young people and you, but do you realize that this country's history is from the very beginning, in a way, a violation of everything that is natural? And you say corporations are all right. Ralph Nader wrote the book American Fashion, 2014. His niece died in one of these Boeing planes. Can we worship for 400, let's say, or over 500 years since Columbus came to the Americas, mammon all the time, and thinking we will have something of the divine life, natural, true life. It is not possible. What I wanted to say, the whole drive of the so-called American dream is being distracted in every level to everyone. You cannot say.
Okay, I think we got it. I think we got the question, right?
The question is, can you see all these millions of people in the USA live like the Amish?
No.
So how will you solve it then?
Okay. The question is really very.
Doro was saying
We need quick questions and leave the panelists to do the answers. Anybody want to tackle that? I mean, I think I would add to the discussion there that there are a couple of different things going on. There's technology makes some things, like renewable energy and solar energy are in electric vehicles and batteries and so forth are examples of technological ways that our society can reduce our emissions without sort of going back to the Stone Age. But there also are individual choices people can make to do less, use less. But things are changing rapidly, and I wanted to just add a layer to that question and ask any of you, given that we need to make such dramatic changes, you were asking for a dramatic change people hadn't ever thought about what to do when communities were getting poisoned and they wanted action. They hadn't thought about evacuations, and they hadn't thought about Superfund. And you guys are dealing with a situation where people haven't really thought enough about how are we going to make radical, drastic reductions in emissions, like half in 10 years. The IPCC, the UN, says we need to reduce half of our emissions in 10 years globally. So that's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of solar and a lot of renewables and a lot of people doing things and a lot of policy changes. So I'm trying to draw a parallel between you're asking for something new and radical and you're doing the same. How do we get people thinking beyond just little incremental steps and really thinking about making massive the changes that we need? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I mean, I don't think we have to go back to the Stone Age. I think that, my son is in technology. We put a man on the moon. We just discovered a new planet out there that has water on it, which scares the dickens out of me because that's probably where the politicians are going to go, right? They think there's now another planet. I just think that this is the most creative, smart, entrepreneur country. And we have the resources. And I don't know the answers specifically how you get from here to here. But I know if there is the will of the people, it will happen. It will happen. Right now, where the will of the people is, we want it to happen and we'll take this incremental change, whatever that might be. We're going to move to such and such. And there's nobody really calling the country together in a big town hall meeting. You have the youth doing their stuff, you have the seniors doing their stuff, you have Sierra Club doing their stuff, you have Audubon doing their stuff, everybody's sort of doing stuff, and it's all good stuff. But there isn't a national town hall meeting to say, okay, what is it we're going to do, and what is the cry out there? And what kind of technology do we need? And you just look at what's happening in the last short period of time. We've come a really long way, not only in the energy sector, but in also closing down power plants that were coal-fired power plants, in moving plastic bags out of places. But the thing is, we don't have this coordinated thing. We just have everybody in their little silos doing extraordinary work, as they should. But we need a big town hall, national town hall meeting to say, how do we pull this together? How do we move forward together? And what might this look like?
Are you going to organize that?
Yeah, next week. Next week, right? You want to add?
Yeah, to add on to that, I do think we need, in order to, I think the main goal is to have, a concrete plan. Like, this is how much we're going to spend, this is what we're going to do to solve climate change. But in order to get there, we need a huge cultural shift. And whether that can be done either by, getting celebrities to start using social media and like making people more aware of this. This can be done through education, you know what I mean? Like training the next generation, or I guess you don't even have time to wait for the next generation. Just teaching people,
Your generation.
Our generation, teaching people how serious this issue is. And again, I think we need to normalize activism. And really, people say, oh, we don't want to scare the kids, you know what I mean? We don't want to tell them the truth. But the truth of the matter is, there's a report put on by the Australian government that says there is a high risk of human extinction by the year 2050. And there is so many reports coming out that say similar things. And we need people to know about this. We need them to know that this is the largest existential threat of our time. And I think once we have that cultural shift and we change that narrative, then we'll be able to reach our ultimate goal.
And I think lastly, we have to stop with this, I think you outlined it really well, stop with this unfair practices. So even when they're doing climate adaptation, they call it, like in Norfolk, Virginia or the Gulf Coast, people who have homes of $120,000 value or more get stilts, paid for. So their houses go up on stilts. If your house is lower than that, you get nothing. And what that means, especially in the Gulf and in Norfolk, where it's a lot of African American families, is that the lower income people's homes get destroyed either through mold and water infiltration over time or washed away, and there's nobody there to help them. Where the wealthy developers will come in and buy the land and erect a fancy house on top of them, which is not helping with climate change at all. The wetlands are gone, and this. So I mean, when you were talking about the justice element to this, that this is really important, and we really need to see when stuff is being done around climate and adaptation, like where is it being done, and is it being done fairly? Because these are the folks who lived in that waterfront for the first time they were able to buy homes for generations and passing them on. So I think that's important too.
So one last question from over here, or back there, okay.
Thank you very much. We're blessed to have you all here. So, Lois, you've been talking about narrative multiple times. I heard that from you, we all narrative. I love the ideas of having a spark and igniting a big fire, but how can we make sure that the fire is feeding on fertile ground? Let's talk about mainstream media. They rarely talk about climate change, and I'm wondering what percent of the overall population in the U.S. Is even interested or in sync with the climate change or the climate crisis. So what could be done in your opinion, to change how the big media companies make money or lose money so that they actually start talking about this? There have been yellow vest protests in France now for over 40 weeks and they never talk about it.
So, yeah, I've been learning more about the media recently, specifically in preparation for the climate strikes this next Friday. And I know that these huge media companies are just looking for a story. That's all they want. They want something to read, something that will catch people's eyes. And so I think, putting on these marches, putting on these strikes, creating a story, making sure that people who are actually affected by climate change directly are being able to share their stories. I think this can help media report more on it because, all they want is a story. And if we give them a story, they'll report more on it.
Yeah, so I also want to talk about, just go off what Ariella just mentioned. Reporters want to cover things that people want to see. They want flashy things. And so that's part of the reason why we continue to do marches and we continue to do strikes despite government inaction. So our governor in Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo, just got reelected. She historically has not done a lot for the environment. But we did a sit-in in the State House anyway. We got coverage for that. We're doing a strike at the State House this Friday, and maybe that's not going to change the government's mind, but like these big actions that take lots of young people, bring them all together, strengthens the movement, and it also brings us media coverage. It becomes a national conversation about the environment because of that. So.
Yeah, and the gray hairs in this room will remember back in the day where 60 Minutes actually did investigations, right? I mean, they spent months on investigations. In 2020, there was Ted Koppel at 11:30. I mean, these were real news media that were really deep, right? And looking for the smoking gun, so to speak. And today, the vast ABC, NBC, and CBS are all owned by polluters. Every single one of them. And you know, Westinghouse is not interested in showing Westinghouse's problems, whether it's how much carbon they're putting in the air or how much poison they're putting in the ground. And so, you know, it's a big conflict, and I absolutely agree that the way to get media now, because it's MIC news and it's all magazine news, is that you really need something flashy. You need something catchy. You need something, and it doesn't tell the whole story, which is the importance of the social media that the young people have created, which can give you the back part of the story. Why is this person doing this, or why is this march happening, and to educate them. But it's really difficult today, and thank goodness for social media. I'm too old for it. Like, I have a hard time with all of social media, quite honestly. But I have interns who can get that social media moving left and right and center and everywhere, right? So I think one of the things we as gray hairs need of the young movement, the younger movement, is that ability to communicate and figure out how do you do that, and then how do you give them the information 60 Minutes is no longer doing, or New York Times or someone else. And I really look to the young people to really be the communicators for us in the future.
I'd like to hear a round of applause for these three. And I think I'm right that we have refreshments through that door. So if you want to talk some more about any of these things, there are going to be lots of people right on the other side of that door who want to talk about those things. And if anybody wants to know anything more about the climate strike on Friday, you can ask at least the three of us, and there's lots of other people here who may want to share their plans for how they're going to get into Boston and so forth. What other housekeeping do we need to do?
That's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Loretta.
Our emails are, mine is zanaji@thisiszerohour.org if you have questions, and Ariel@thisiszerohour.org. So you can reach out to us there.
And there's an Al Filipov Facebook page, right, Loretta? Yeah. Peace and Justice Forum. So like our Facebook page, okay?